Good morning, everybody. I'm Patrick Duffy, and I'm very excited to be back in the beautiful Nasdaq studios overlooking Times Square here in New York City. Today is part 4 of our series Future Thinker that runs in tandem with Design Pavilion, an annual event celebrating design and architecture in the heart of New York City's Times Square during the NYC by Design Festival. Our series explores how agents of change, disruptors, and leaders in the design industry will shape tomorrow and what they're doing today to make a positive impact on people and planet. My next guest is a cultural strategist establishing strategic business plans for arts institutions, municipalities, and governments around the world. She has recently completed cultural strategies and developed frameworks for London Bridge, Wembley Park, and Exhibition Road Cultural Group in London. She was also creative director for the Times Square Alliance and founding director of Times Square Arts in New York City, where she developed a dedicated arts program within one of the largest and most successful business improvement districts in the world. It's my pleasure to welcome Managing Partner and Culture Director of Futurecity, Sherry Dobbin. Sherry, welcome.
Thank you, Patrick.
Yeah, what's it like being back in Times Square?
Honestly, it's an honor, and it's really nice to step back into it and realize what a privilege it has been that I have had access to some of the most incredible places on earth. And what we did in Times Square has been not only great for Times Square, but it's been really helping us to develop plans for different cities, different areas, and helping them to get over any kind of obstacles or fears that they might have and realize that they can do very exciting programming themselves.
So that brings me to my next question. Tell us a little bit about what you do with Futurecity and what Futurecity is.
So Futurecity is the leading cultural placemaking agency. Based in London, was founded in 2007 by Mark Davey, and then since has really grown into that, public art commissioning, but then we're really also looking at developing creative districts, cultural districts, and even working with entire cities to understand frameworks about how they'll engage with culture, but also how culture really helps them to build the identity of their place. So it's not something that we're asking to tack on or to take away from anything else. It's really a very exceptional way to raise the importance and the value and the excitement of their place for the residents as well as visitors.
What kind of value does a city see or a government see or municipality see from the types of programming that you do?
Well, you know, just in March, we were in MIPIM, which is the largest property sector's conference. And I can't remember how many people come. I think it's like 20,000 or something. The thing that was popping up across every country, every continent, was this idea of being able to promote a creative place. A creative city, an exciting one, something about creativity and innovation. This comes up over and over and over again. So the reality is that creativity is one of our newest commodities. This is really what we're selling now. So first we used to sell items, then we were selling ideas of tech and innovation. Now we're really trying to understand that you can't just have the gadgets and the thought and the science and the technology. It's what are you going to do with it? How are you going to expand beyond? So there is an inherent value in the idea of this, but then how one actually excites, energizes, and then catalyzes the creativity and innovation, that's what people are looking for.
How do you commodify creativity?
Well, there are many ways that different sectors have been looking at whether people will decide to invest in a certain area, whether they can actually lease their properties based on what their cultural value or their creative offer is. And then it goes all the way down to the individuals, where they might shop, where they might dine, where they might decide to live. So, you know, whether people are trying to actually attract a major business into their city, or a person is just trying to find a place to live, or an employee wants to figure out where they want to work, people now are looking for what is an exciting place to be and what does something that is a little bit unusual and makes them inspired to actually go to that place.
Can you give us a little insight into either some of the programs that you've done in the past, maybe here in Times Square, or things that you are working on now?
Yeah, I mean, Times Square was amazing, and because the president, Tim Tompkins, was really up for this concept of using Times Square as a great experiment for all cities. We did everything from, German expressionistic opera to creating the world's largest and longest running digital art exhibition actually on the billboards. And then we also set crazy programming within venues, and we really went to people and said, what's your worst night? Who is it you can't get here? I've got to create a solution for this.
So that's almost like an economic empowerment program that you've created for this business district specifically.
Yeah, and one of the things that Times Square was battling with, and many places are battling with, is how do I pitch this? Do I want to pitch this to the tourist, or do I want to pitch this, in this case, to the New Yorker? And the answer was pitch it to the New Yorker, because everybody wants an authentic experience now. You don't need to actually fight with this. The tourist now is the one who is interested in having an experience that they might not be able to have anywhere else. And that was something that was just emphasized over and over and over again in Times Square. So when we talk about Wembley Park, for example, they think of themselves as a place that is developing 4,000 new homes. And do people really want to come here? Do I have the same offer as another part of London? Completely missing that they are a world icon and they should be celebrating this even more so. So they came to us and really wanted to understand how to take the strategy we'd already put in place, but also how to up the ambition and how to feel stronger about celebrating that. Or, you know, in Melbourne, we're working with some architects on a competition of how do you even redesign what is the new skyscraper, what is the new living, what is this new place where people are going to work, live, play, shop, stay as hotel, what does it mean when it's sitting in the center of a city? And then there are other projects where we're actually thinking about an entire district or an entire city, and understanding it's not just one thing that you offer, but really looking at what is going to be special to that place, but is learned from other cities.
So the name Futurecity automatically denotes that we're looking towards the future all the time. You're always looking towards the future. Sustainability, climate change, these are things that are on our question. Can you give us a little insight as to how, with your programming, how sustainability fits into that when you're looking at building out a culture program?
Well, I mean, one of the things is don't think of it as something separate, right? So if you're going to do that, we want to work with architects and designers and artists who are already thinking in that way. So it's not about how do you tack it onto the building later, it's how do you embrace it and how do you think about whatever is a new standard, how could you create that in a way that hasn't been seen before? So use it as a creative challenge from the very beginning. So it's not in conflict.
So specifically then, can you tell us when you create these projects, what's informing new areas and what's happening around that?
Well, I mean, as far as environmentally speaking?
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it is thinking about what kind of planting and landscaping not being something that you just throw down afterward, but how does it actually crawl through the entire building? How do you possibly work with a university or a research center to think about constantly updating what are going to be these vertical climbing plants? Or how do you have the artist work with the landscape architect to understand that you create something really beautiful out of what it is that you want there? So again, we heard yesterday in some of the design talks that there are going to be, I mean, New York City just passed a policy in which there need to be roof gardens, basically, right? Green spaces on all the gardens. So don't think of this as something bad. Think of this as a great opportunity to be able to showcase something. And as we have drones that are able to take aerial views more and more often, it's also a great way to capture that. And if you do something exciting with it, people remember your building by that. So I think it's important that people embrace these challenges, but also think about how it can be really defining for them.
Bring me back to London Bridge. You had a challenge there where you had an iconic piece of architecture in front of you, and there was literally no cultural programming. What did you do there, and how did that transform the bridge and the area around?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say there was no cultural programming, because one of the things that we obviously do is look at who's already there and what cultural institutions. But as far as being able to assist in bringing them out and bringing them to certain areas that are more visible, yes. I mean, we were sitting in a place between London Bridge and Tower Bridge, and there was almost a feeling like everything is on the other side of the river, so who are we? But the thing is that that's your backdrop. So even though it's your neighbor, whatever you do, you can use, the city of London in the background. So basically, what it was is understand that almost any part of this area where you were standing, the backdrop was always these icons of London, so why not use it? So a lot of it was thinking about how these public spaces, in essence, are your stages or your frames. And then it's understanding who owns and manages those places, and then negotiating relationships with them. So a lot of the structure of the strategy is all about setting up the partnerships, thinking about what could happen, getting all of that framework ready, so when the great idea comes, they know who to go to, they know what they can and can't do, and there's somebody there, the business improvement district, to help facilitate that.
So what does that do for the impact of the business? Just becoming a part of that network where they, for example, when you approach them about becoming a part of this essentially network that you create around the Tower Bridge, what does that do for the business that gets involved?
Well, one of the objectives of the Business Improvement District was they were saying they want London Bridge to be an area that you go to as opposed to through, right? So it's one of the biggest train stations. There are a lot of people who are coming north to south. There's a new line that actually connects through. And they were afraid that people were just coming in, leaving the area, going to work, leaving the area. So the advantage to the great transportation is that you could also go more quickly. What they wanted to do was actually to emphasize that this is a place you might stay. One of the reasons why employees might decide to join a company is because they realize that when they go there, there are also great places immediately after work where they may hang out. The residents want to know that there is some integration. It's not just a big wall of business and then homes. What is that in-between space? And so one of the things we really concentrated on is that happy hour time.
Yeah.
What's going to happen between that time of finishing work and then going home? Or if you're coming home, how you might have a little integration with that community. So it's not just business and resident, but how you actually start to mix.
So complete and total integration.
Yeah.
I'd actually like to know too about how you integrate technology. How are you using that to look towards the future with your programming?
Yeah, I mean, artists are investigating technology as soon as it comes in. So some of it, as we know, we're all dealing with more and more screens in our life, from the very small to the very large. And so there's that. There's also a lot of smart technology, but there isn't as much creative interpretation. So another thing we're doing is working with artists to actually think about how to make that visualization of data more exciting. We're just working with an artist who has been working across feature film, as well as video, as well as VR and AR, and really starting to develop a program that we hope to announce next week that is really addressing all the dimensions that we live in our life and the integration of technology. And we've worked with artists like Studio Drift, who also are thinking about this cross-section between art, nature, technology, and how we can actually use technology to bring us back to ourselves in our natural environment and vice versa, and not think about them as such opposing forces.
So why is cultural programming and cultural strategy so important for a city? Would they just kind of go wild, like the Wild Wild West, if we didn't have that?
Well, I think what can happen is, if you don't plan for it, what you'll have are a series of one-off moments that can take place.
Sure.
And it will be just that. But if you put in a little bit of infrastructure, you only need to do a little bit to get it going. The creative community is going to want to be able to take that over. And one of the things we were talking about yesterday in the talk is that it's actually cheaper or the same price to keep sustaining culture than it is to let it die out and then inject a bunch of money to bring it back, because you need to bring people back to that area. So the reality is, if you can help sustain this, and this doesn't mean to be just government funding, this is really thinking about a diversity of stakeholders and revenue sources. But if you can support it, it means ideally you're not going to have these times where certain areas of your city die out and go into decay or have problems, and then need to bring all the creative community back to convince people that it's an exciting and interesting place to be. Allow those places to be supported and to continue to develop, and then you won't have all of these dips. So it just seems to be better to keep it continually going. And the strategy is really to set up the basic structure, but to be flexible enough that it can adjust to what are the contemporary issues and pressures.
I have a question about gentrification. And how does that fit into a big city? Like, for instance, we look at New York City and the Times Square district, which you have a challenge here because it used to be completely different than what it is now. So how do you maintain the cultural importance of a district without displacing that? And
well, now you've just said it. There's a difference between gentrification and displacement. A lot of people, people do this all the time, right?
Yep.
A lot of people don't mind that their area has been improved.
Okay.
What they want is not to be forced out once it's improved.
And
that's
yeah.
rather crucial.
Yeah.
So that is another reason why it's very important to understand what is there and who is there
And
from
are
the
those
beginning.
things that you think about when you're programming? Those are things that you're thinking about when you're programming.
I mean, one thing that's happening in the UK is that it used to be just a sort of selling market, right? So developers just wanted to be able to sell and then be able to turn it around quickly. A lot of developers now are doing are doing PRS schemes. So they're very interested in long-term rental. They're interested in the long-term development of their community, and they're going to have to stick around. So this is wonderful because this means that it's important to understand who is the existing community, who are the communities on the perimeter, and how do you think about building something that's going to help mesh this? Because the idea is that you've got to integrate it, and you've got to be able to strengthen it.
So it sounds like data is a huge part of what you do too. How do you harvest that data, and how do you use that data?
Ooh, such a good one. There's so much data. And then like yesterday, we heard nothing but statistics. And I thought if I put all of them together, I didn't know that they were all actually in alignment. No, we have a series of associates because we're very interested in who are the specialists in this area. So, we have one person, Vishal Kumar, who's a data scientist. And he has a great background because he comes from the London School of Economics as well as Sotheby's, you know. So the idea of trying to understand how do we take this information, how can it inform us, what kind of narrative is it actually giving us is rather crucial. Data is a part of our lives, but you have to make sure you understand what you're getting, how you want to pull it together, and how you can put it into a narrative that's actually helpful.
It's interesting when we talk about such high-tech things like data and then how a city has to feel. So how do you connect data and the actual feeling of a city, and how do you keep that feeling alive?
Yeah, I know. I've been thinking a lot about this. We need efficiency in our lives, but a lot of arts and culture is not about efficiency. And then we heard someone talking about the well building standard also. There are these other parts of our existence that are necessary to feed. And they do have a relationship with the efficiency part as well. Sometimes it's harder to map it or track it. But nonetheless, we need these aspects of our lives. So certain things need to be made to feel more efficient or to help us to understand. And sometimes arts and culture can be a way to creatively frame that. Other times they need to almost be a distraction or a balance to it. We need to find a way that we're still connecting to our humanity.
Yes.
We need to do that for the sake of living all together. And then even if you want to look at it from an economic standpoint, you need to be human enough to open up, to be able to be creative, to come up with new solutions.
Interesting. Do you think, as we're sitting here at the Nasdaq, which has over 4,000 companies listed, do you think that brands, big global ones, should be getting in, and if they're not already getting in on the cultural programming aspects of what you're doing?
I think a lot of them have been.
Okay.
Yeah, they understand that they need to be at the forefront. This is what excites people. The other thing is we're in a very visual culture, right? Yeah. So who creates visual sort of language on a regular basis? Artists do. Designers do. Yeah. And so they've been getting smarter and smarter about how to do that. I think in some ways, though, it's still been how can I use these individuals to help? And I think it gets much more interesting when it gets into the collaborations. So some larger brands, when they give a little bit of, relax a bit, and give a little more freedom to what can be explored, they're finding that artists or designers can come up with something they hadn't anticipated. And it's necessary for people when they're being quite fickle about where they're going to spend their money. Part of what they're looking for is, do I want to be associated with that kind of brand or that experience, or who else are they supporting? And it's not necessarily literal. One can get excited about someone sponsoring a poetry festival, even though you don't necessarily need that particular brand to pump out poetry for you.
But what about getting involved in a community and supporting a community that may really need the support? Is that there?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I think there's been a shift in corporate social responsibility and branding and where those two mix and trying to understand which is which. And then some of the efforts need to come directly from those larger companies in the particular places they are because they have such different needs. So I think there is a lot of question of, what is that global commitment and then what is my local commitment?
Yeah, it's fascinating. My last question, because we do have to go, but I could stay here and talk to you all day, is let's look towards the future. Yesterday at the Impact Summit, you made an amazing comment about we really need to look at the youth. What are you seeing? What are some of the things that you're inspired by the next generation?
I think one of the most important things is that younger people don't see boundaries the way we do. I mean, they're grabbing information, images, interaction. They're able to mix up associations and they're creating all sorts of, hybrid isn't even enough. And I think it's really important that as we do that, as we think about creating our spaces or we think about what kind of regulation, we should stop thinking in silos and we need to think about how we give more opportunity that people can creatively engage and consider what will be a new space. There's a lot of talk about the third space, but again, even that almost feels too prescriptive. Watch what they're doing when they feel the license to create their own, and and constantly support and watch the experimentation, because that is what's going to inform the very, very formal entities and institutions that we have.
Sherry, it has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you so much.
Always great to talk to you.
Always great to talk to you. Welcome back to Times Square. How can people find you?
They can find us on our website, futurecity.co.uk.
And they can follow you on?
They can follow us on @FutureCityBlog, and that's either through Instagram or through Twitter.
Follow Sherry. Thank you so much for coming to join us today here at Nasdaq. It's been a compelling and exciting conversation. I can't wait to see the cultural programs that you come up with in the future. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see